Okay, here we go. So this is my official welcome, Esther. Welcome to the McMaster Practical Theology Guild, and thank you for spending the next hour with us.
You're
Um,
so welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I don't think I've had a conversation with practical theologians as a thing, so as a group. So thank you.
well, well, I think your philosophy of knowing is beneficial for so many different fields. I was on a call with Esther a few weeks ago. So I was on as a storyteller. There was a couple of pastors, and then there was an FBI agent, and all of us were saying, "Oh, your way of knowing is really helpful." So just as an introduction, I'm just going to read from the back of your book here. Esther Meek, she was professor of philosophy at Geneva College for lots of years. She was senior scholar at the Seattle School for Theology and
Yeah.
Psychology and a Fujimori Institute scholar.
No, those are present.
Oh, okay, present.
And the Kirby Lang is too, but that's kind of a,
Okay, good. Is there anything else you want to add to that? I want you to start off by telling us how you got interested in philosophy.
yeah, I'm
But
happy
you want to add
to.
anything to that first?
Well, I want to add too that I really think that what I'm about is an approach to knowing in particular that characterizes knowing in every single field. And that includes athletics and culinary work and counseling and artistry and yeah. So, and in particular, something that I would hope would break down artificial walls between whatever plain old theology is and practical theology. There sometimes is a presumed divorce there that I mean to dispute. And so I have felt for years, especially, I'm not trained as a theologian, though I've done some theological work, and I'm a, Bible believing Christian, and have had to work that all through. But I've just always felt as if this approach to knowing is really especially important to theological work, because if you don't have it, if you've just kind of inhaled what we're dealt in modernity, you've got a real disconnect that leads to leaving the ministry, leaving the church, leaving. Having started out with the love of Jesus, you can end up with nothing. And it doesn't have to do with religion, it has to do with philosophy. So that's what I've seen myself as being about. And so, as for my story of philosophy, I feel as if it began when I was around 13 and I had some questions that were weird and I thought were sin. One was, how do I know that God exists? I knew what the Bible said, as far as it was given to me at that point. But I still had the question about how could I be sure that God exists? And then the other thing is the more fundamental problem was, how did I know there was anything outside my mind? I had this presumption that I was certain of the contents of my mind. I know that's laughable, but just because of that, it blocked me from the real. And so I had no proof that you were anything more than an idea in my mind. So not only did I have a problem with God, I had a problem with you. So I kept that to myself because I was embarrassed of it. But in high school, I followed my mother's red pencil underlinings through Francis Schaeffer's The God Who Is There, as probably a lot of people my age did, except, I had my mother's help on that one. But I found that my questions were not sin, they were philosophical, and that responses to them had shaped whole cultural epochs across the disciplines, which fired my imagination for what I later got to teach at Geneva College, which also came from Francis Schaeffer's influence, which was an interdisciplinary arts and philosophy and ideas course, which my first 2 degrees were interdisciplinary, and I just loved that. at that point in high school, it took me a while to find out that you could actually study philosophy. And when I found that out, it took me 12 hours to change course 180 degrees and follow that for the rest of my life. So that's the story. So it really was my own questions that got me into it. And then what I found was, when in that first glimmer, 12-hour glimmer, I thought, well, I was already in college as a chemistry major, and things were disconnected. The subjects were disconnected. And that bothered me. And it seemed to me that philosophy, if it was what I thought it was, had the hope of giving me a handle, a fundamental handle, and put things together in a meaningful way. And then subsequently, I found that philosophy revitalized my faith. It's like I knew what the answers were, but I hadn't known what the questions were. So it was wonderful to see my own Christianity as a legitimate and vibrant and eventually the coolest ever response to fundamental philosophical questions and our orientation in the world. So that's kind of the beginning of my story. Do you want to ask me a further prompting question about that, or?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm thinking, okay, you're a philosopher, you're speaking to a group of practical theologians, but we want to know God, and we want to know our congregations and our ministries. So there are things
throughout everything you do.
Exactly. Yeah. So we want to know these things, and you've got a way of thinking about knowing. So
Yeah.
I would love for you to talk about your covenant epistemology, but also the two terms from Lonnie that come up that you need to understand in order to understand your covenantal epistemology.
Yeah, and first let me say, I'm no more philosophical than the rest of you, because we're human persons. And so there's one thing you need to be philosophical, and that's to have been born as a human person. Your dog is not philosophical, but you are by a pretty stark contrast. So it doesn't matter whether you had a philosophy course or not. You can't help but ask about the meaning of human existence and what reality is and how we are involved with it. That's just kind of at the core of who you are. We do live in an age that has discredited philosophy as unpractical. So it's an anti-philosophical philosophy, which ought to, make you realize you're up against some issues. So what I needed to find out about my Christianity, and so my first book, which came out 20 years ago, we're celebrating the birthday. If you were all here, I'd pass out a sticker. This is the little guy who's on the front cover of Longing to Know, and he's turned 20 also. so I'd give you each a sticker. But Longing to Know, the subtitle, The Philosophy of Knowledge for Ordinary People. And by the way, that's another thing about me. It just seems to me, if we're all philosophical, then philosophy ought to be done for all of us. And so I'm not done my work if I haven't figured out how this matters in the streets for all of us. And so I've got that passion always in all of my work to try to make it accessible for everybody. But what I needed to do was figure out this weird thing that Christians seem to do in the way of knowing God, which was trust a book to tell them about something you couldn't see, someone you couldn't see. I mean, the whole thing seemed like it was weird, and it didn't even count as knowledge. Some people thought of it as faith as opposed to knowledge, which bothered the heck out of me too. And so if you see my quest as being one of trying to answer those questions, a major breakthrough for me was finding the work of this scientist turned philosopher named Michael Polanyi. Have you heard of him or not? So that's Polanyi. You don't want to say Polanyi. You want to say Polanyi, or there's other ways it gets pronounced. Polanyi, which I tend to fall in as Polanyi. Just don't put your Y up there So it sounds like that inlet in The Hunt for Red October, the Polyarny inlet. So he was a premier scientist, Hungarian, beginning of the 20th century, who just got more and more interested in philosophical questions. He actually gave the Gifford Lecture, the prestigious lectures in natural religion around 1950, in those years in there. So, he was enough in that range to have been chosen to give the Gifford Lectures. But, he felt that there were goofy ideas out there about scientific discovery, how scientific discovery happened, how knowledge works in science. And he said, if knowledge works like we presume, no scientific discovery could ever happen, but it does. So we ought to pay attention to what we're actually doing when we know. And so he just made some brilliant proposals, even though he wasn't a trained philosopher, perhaps precisely because he wasn't a trained philosopher. He wasn't stuck in the guild, but he was looking at how he moved from knowing nothing to knowing something, as opposed to, kind of this explanation-based, collect information, add it all up, sort of a linear understanding of knowledge. He said, no, you have to accredit things that you half understand, hunches and intuitions and clues, and you need an account of knowing that legitimates them, and moves you toward knowing. Well, the more he talked, the more I thought, well, this makes sense of my faith. There's a lot like my ordinary Christianity in here. So that's what led me to, when I wrote Longing to Know, to really tap his work. So it's a book for people considering Christianity, like me, who have questions about knowing and issues about knowing, like faith and doubt and certainty and all those kinds of things. And what it does is it asks, can we know God? But then it says, well, first we need to talk about knowing, how knowing works. So Longing to Know presents over several chapters Polanyi's understanding of how knowing actually works. And that's where I get the term subsidiary focal integration, and also indeterminate future manifestations, which I'll tell you. But in that book, I develop a little piece of it in each little chapter, and then I apply it to, here's the driving analogy, and it is that knowing God is like knowing my auto mechanic. In other words, what I needed to know was that my process of knowing God was an ordinary act of knowing. Okay, he takes over my life and transforms it, but it's got all the same components. So there is something that is faith-like in riding a bike. I certainly know, because you got to trust yourself to the contraption, and also in my case to my father's shouted authoritative guide. So all of that I play out in Longing to Know. All right, subsidiary focal integration. Ready? Polanyi said, all knowing, this is what you've already been doing. So I'm not taking you out of your comfort zone. I'm returning you to it. It has a two-level structure, from to. Subsidiary focal. And they're connected by this transformative integration. So in all your knowing, you rely on clues, you entrust yourself, you indwell, you attend from things that you can't always put into words, to shape and submit to an integrative focal pattern. And when I say integrative, I mean it's not additive. The pattern doesn't reduce to the clues. It's more like we all talk about an aha moment or a breakthrough. That's what it is. So what happens in an act of insight, a moment of insight, is that the pattern that you come up to transforms all the groping and the half understanding that you were doing trying to get to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can start to think of endless examples. And if for you to get on board with this is what you need to do. You need to see that just absolutely everything you're doing in the way of knowing is subsidiary focal integration. So A Hunt for Red October, I've already mentioned, it's an old film where this Russian captain takes this nuclear submarine out against orders, and everybody thinks he's starting World War III. And pardon my French, but there's this holy shit moment, as I call it, in the briefing room. It's actually, he says, son of a bitch, I think, when the military historian Jack Ryan realizes he's not trying to start World War III. He's trying to defect and bring this huge submarine with him. So then the whole rest of the movie is about him trying to work out this aha moment, which is kind of what happens. So we, as a growing up in my family, my father and mother loved Arsenic and Old Lace. I don't know if you ever remember that play. It's hilarious. But my father would often say, well, I'm the son of a sea cook. Well, when I finally saw Arsenic and Old Lace, that's the aha moment at the end, where this son realizes he's a bastard, really, that his father was not the crazy man that had made everybody else in the family crazy, but he was just some random sea cook off the wharf. So that's an aha moment. So those are wonderful breakthroughs. They're great for filming those kinds of breakthroughs, and thinking about those are good. So subsidiary focal integration, you can see it in perception, you can see it in all your skills, and then you can see it in all of your processes of discovery. And I would say subsidiary focal integration is intrinsically artful, and it is also the artistic act. So what this does is it says, look, this is how knowing works in every area, whether it's theology or practical theology, art or sports or business or counseling or like that. All knowing is subsidiary focal integration. And you guys get to, kind of play that through in your life. Now, what especially was thrilling enough to me in Polanyi's writings that I did my dissertation on it was, remember, I was the baby skeptic. How do I know? How do I know there's a world outside my mind? Well, Polanyi, the discoverer, said repeatedly, you've made contact with reality in your discovery if you have a sense of the possibility of indeterminate future manifestations, which I coined as the IFM effect. So indeterminate future manifestations. What that means is you can't put it into words. It's a feeling that you're onto something, or that this thing is pregnant with possibilities that you can't even name. And at the moment of the discovery, it's not confirmation, it's hope of confirmation, because you have this sense of future possibilities. And I think we navigate by possibilities all the time. And in fact, he would say that, those are key. You have to follow those. It's a good, if you think about following Jesus and unfolding your calling over your life, you can see it as a matter of sensing future possibilities. So that's so all knowing, I've come to say over the years, is all knowing is from, to, and beyond. So for example, in riding a bike, when I finally have the breakthrough so that I'm able to ride, what happens is I start thinking, oh, there's all these places I can ride. So the world comes to me in so many bike paths that are possibilities, that now that I can ride, I'm so connected with reality that it just opens vistas, right? So what subsidiary focal integration does is root us in reality, both at the near or subsidiary end, because we have given ourselves to indwell the bike, and we're rooted in that way, but then also roots us at the focal end, because the focal opens up to possibilities that I cannot name, that are just beyond my conceiving at that moment. So subsidiary focal integration with this IFM effect, as I call it. Now, another thing you asked about covenant epistemology, and then I'll let you pick it up. Okay, so as I was trying to explain all this in longing to know, one of the things that I said, because I feel this is right, and this is about this integrative pattern that's irreducible to the clues that I was relying on. Okay, so I said, it's not as if reality answers your questions so much as that it explodes them. It changes the questions. And that's how you know you've made contact with reality. It's almost like reality walks in and takes over, which, if you know Jesus, you might find that apt. Right? He changes your life. And that's how you know you've made contact with reality. Okay, it's the IFM effect. And the IFM effect starts to become kind of like a person coming after you. Okay, which led me to my own proposal, which is subsidiary focal integration augmented, I would say, to say that the paradigm of knowing is not collecting information, but the interpersonal, covenantally constituted relationship between the knower and the yet to be known. So I spend a lot of time in loving to know, which is my argument for, and my exposition of this thing I call covenant epistemology, arguing that reality is person-like, which, okay, you could say the Bible tells us, it's all God and his stuff, right? So I knew I was on firm ground there. But in our ordinary knowing, even if maybe we don't yet know Christ, there's something like an interpersonal dance between the knower and the yet to be known. And I argue that best practices of coming to know are those that that invite, rather than, I might say, rape the real. So treats reality as person-like, and then behaves in what I call epistemological etiquette to invite reality to come. And so things like attentive listening, which I know you have a question about, invites the real. That's an epistemic practice that invites reality to come. Active listening itself invites reality to be itself and to come to us. So that's what's going on in covenant epistemology.
Good. Yeah. So I'm thinking of my husband, who was doing a Bible study Sunday night, and he's trying to explain the kingdom of heaven. And so this is like a, not a tangible thing that's easy to understand. So you talk about clues and being attentive to clues. And so I'm thinking of my husband, teaching about the kingdom of heaven. It's teaching people how to be attentive to those clues. So talk to me about attentiveness and clues, like how, because this is how we know.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's in the epistemological etiquette. Active listening is itself a good epistemic practice. And I would say, with regard to clues, the first thing to do epistemologically is realize their significance, meaning we all follow clues. We would all grant that. But how do you have an epistemology that of clues? Because a clue, by definition, is a half understanding, right? And there is typically no epistemology that accredits something less than articulatable statements of information. And Polanyi said, that's the problem, right? So you have to, and if you're going to attend to clues, one of the things you have to do is indwell them, whatever that means. You got to figure out how to get inside them. And that's not exactly a method. So, my father put me on this bike, the top of the grassy hill, and pushed me and yelled balance. And all of a sudden I'm trying to figure out what the word balance means. If I went into a calculus class, it would be the same problem. But somehow I have to start to get inside and indwell that. And the trick is part of, and this is what indwelling involves. It's we want to attend to clues, but what we really want to do is attend from them. So you want to get inside and try to see the world from them. So that's what I had to do with my father yelling balance. Somehow, to make sense of that, I had to get inside and look from that. But reading's just the same way. Somehow you got to figure out, to learn to read or to learn to read a different language. Somehow you've got to move from looking at the marks on the page to looking from them. And if you look at them, that's a false attention, I might want to say, that's actually going to block reality. You can't learn to read until you can attend from them. Does that make sense? So those clues are meant to be subsidiary. Now you can be intentional about them. I think the cool thing about the subsidiary is, first of all, it's not foolproof. It could be mistaken and need fixed. But the second thing is it's trainable. So actually, I think the job of a teacher, okay, I taught logic for 45 years. You got to make an argument, but you also have, what you have to see yourself doing is uttering maxims that make people's body feel like position themselves in the right place. And I would think that's what the parables about the kingdom of heaven do, is Jesus is speaking maximically to allow us to climb inside and feel what the kingdom of heaven is like. That makes sense?
I'm thinking about what you talk about in the Doorway to Artistry about loving things. And maybe as practical theologians, we've got an edge here because we already have a good respect for things like for congregations or ministries or whatever. It's like we're as practical theologians, we're trying to keep our feet in both worlds, right? The theology academic, but also kind of what's happening on the ground. And sometimes in Christian thought, there's a dualism between heavenly things and spiritual things and kind of human things, and you push back against that. Yeah, can you just talk to us a bit about that, about loving things?
Sure. To continue my story, again, I've spent my years trying to get over my skepticism and come to trust the real. And I actually think, I think it's not my problem only. I think modernity has, and when I say the modern age or the modern philosophy, I mean 1600s to the present, with some, modernism is a philosophy that sets up knowledge as certain information and disavows things like philosophy, and also disavows the real. Okay, so it puts us in suspicion against us, hence my skepticism at age 13. So I don't even trust that there's a reality out there. So I tend to think, so one way this has come to expression is people think, well, I make my own reality. I construct my own reality. So that can go on too, or people, they're more interested in seeing their different perspectives than thinking that there's something objectively out there. And then another thing that modernism has done is it's put forward an account of the real as mere mindless material that reduces to bits and is there for our manipulation to the end of utility and power and mastery and all of that. So in other words, our goal is not truth in the sense of communion with reality. It's prowess, that sort of thing. So it's taken me personally some years to get over that, but I have. So I have finally gotten, and let's see, Stefan, you held up Little Manual for Knowing. After I wrote that book, I was rereading it because I would teach it also in logic class to say, okay, there's some philosophical awareness for you. I realized that I had written in there something about trusting reality. And I went, oh, did I say that? And it was like I was frightened all over, because that's exactly what I did not have, was trust of reality. And how could I ever get so my questions would actually dissipate and I would trust the real. And I think that is a distinctively modernist problem. Right now, so how do you address that? And so in Doorway to Artistry, I figure if an artist or any of us in our artistry imbibes, as I think we all do, this implicit modernist philosophical outlook that suspects reality, puts us as over against it, and sees us as collecting information as our knowledge, well, that would adversely impact your creative process. It would, I mean, one of the things modernity does is it jettisons beauty and it jettisons artistry along with philosophy and renders all of that private and subjective, along with, Christianity gets rendered that way too. And so all of that is discredited. So then if you pick up your paintbrush, you're seen as doing something private and subjective in a matter of taste, and not connected with the real. On the other hand, anybody who makes anything, and that's all of us, even if it's an omelet, right? You are loving your materials, right? I remember a guy who's given me some mezzotints that he's done. I've got one downstairs. And I remember saying, it's such a long process. You just have to love the feel of it. You got to love the feel of doing the rubbing and the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. That's when I cottoned on to this tactile love of the materials. And yeah, so Deborah's saying, I love paint. Yeah, right. So you gotta love the feel of it. Well, that's loving things. And see, what modernity did was it disavowed things. So a reductivism that says, okay, you are merely your chemical elements, a thing really isn't a thing. It just reduces to the components or its origins or that sort of thing. It's actually self-contradictory, because if I say you, Elizabeth, are just 99% hydrogen, oxygen, etc., like that, well, you couldn't even make the sentence if you didn't have the you. And the interesting thing about the chemical elements is they're you. So really philosophically, there just has to be what I call and not just but classical medieval metaphysics, a primacy of the thing that is irreducible to its components, or the components wouldn't even be components. So even if you are a creative, and especially if you're a creative you're moving toward not yet things, just like in discovery. You're starting with the near and the here, you're honoring it, you're attending to it and from it, and you're saying, let me see what I can make from this. And so there's a love of the things near and a love of the things that are beckoning you, your idea that you're moving toward. I'm not a painter or anything like that, but I love seashells. I have thousands and thousands of seashells, and I can't help myself. I got to pick them up. I got to bring them home. And then I like to make stuff out of them. And now I'm teaching my grandchildren to, the glories of Mod Podge. So you can, I usually use a glue gun, but for their sakes, I thought, remembering back to my teen years, I got to pick up this old Mod Podge stuff that still exists, and so we're making things out of the seashells because I love I can't get over the colors. I can't get over the colors of the seascape and the seashells. That's just endless delight for me. Okay, I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Well, I want to make sure that we have a few minutes for questions, but just can you speak for about 2 minutes on thinking of us as practical theologians, thinking of us as artists?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Because you said right at the beginning that really we're all philosophers, we're all artists. But how do we think of our work as art, and how can that help us?
Yeah. So back to subsidiary focal integration. If you're doing that in a discovery, what you're doing, you've got your eye on this half-hidden reality, right? Eyes up there, focus, even though you don't know what it is yet. And you're subsidiarily, creatively groping toward it. So knowing, in the sense of moving toward the not yet known, can only be creative. So at the heart of knowing is artistry. That's why I'm sure you're practicing it. And in particular, you think of your dissertations, right? I mean, okay, they want you to come up with a proposal, which, is really, really good. But the whole thing is scary because you're groping toward this thing that you only have a glimmer of. And then, it can be painful, it's hard, it can be long, it can go on for your whole life. Actually, I think it's going on for eternity, sorry to say, but I think it'll be a joy when we're fixed. But so all of that is this creative subsidiary groping, and that is trainable. So in a texture in Loving to Know, I talk about virtuosity, which is a word I learned from piano practicing years back, the virtuoso pianist, which I never was, but my sister was, so you can actually train your subsidiaries. In the case of PhDs, quite frankly, what you're getting trained in is scholarship. So it's an artistry of scholarship, right? And when you get that PH or D or whatever you're getting, then you are a professional in the sense that you have been trained in this artful, virtuoso-esque groping for the real. And the lovely thing about your terminal degree is it's kind of like a country club card, because then you can start to learn whatever you want. Right? You can teach whatever you want, whatever they need, you can teach, you've got the credentialing that says that you have been formed in this particular form of artistry. So how's that?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Good.
We've got a few minutes here. Does anyone have any questions? Calvin, go ahead.
Esther, very, very exciting. And I think what you're leading me to is an integration of some kind with what the Australian practice-led research people refer to as doing knowing.
Oh.
That it's this idea of being imminently present to the present and what is there, and attending to that brings about a kind of knowing that you would not have if you were looking beyond what is there in the present. And and particularly through your doing. And I just don't know whether that resonates with you. It just is it's just like a wild thought that is I'm mulling over here.
Well, I would say that's all knowing. That's great knowing. No matter, and see, Polanyi's argument in personal knowledge is, look, it doesn't matter how much you're into precision or verification, all of that is rooted in and outrun by the inarticulate subsidiary. That it involves our felt body sense, but it also involves things like resolve and kind of a here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. But yes, so we're, to try to get an account of knowing that torpedoes the typical divorces that we've inherited in modernity, like between theory and practice, right? Knowledge and belief, reason and faith, art and science, those kinds of things. The best way I've found is to teach you guys subsidiary focal integration. And I think, here's what I think. If you had a defective, to the extent that you have a defective knowledge as information inherited modernist outlook, there is no way you can play baseball or what we call football. I'm sure it's true of soccer, though I've watched less of it, right? It would be ridiculous. You can't play a piano. All of these things that are skills involves you driving, bike riding. I mean, it's endless. You have to subsidiarily indwell what you cannot articulate at the time that you're indwelling it, right? And so I think, though I appreciate the doing knowing thing, the key word that I would have you hang on to and think about is the word subsidiary, because nobody else talks about it besides Michael Polanyi, and it makes a difference. We know that practice is important, but if we don't have the idea of subsidiary, what we end up with and revert to is method or motor memory or things like that, which are, it's like still focal. And what you need to do is get at that idea of subsidiary.
Okay. Uriah, do you want to go?
Maybe two quick questions. So listening to you from the perspective of learning theory and so on, would you equate integrative focal pattern to the synthesis level of learning? If we look at Bloom's taxonomy, where synthesis level is really the first generative level. I'm also thinking about what you're saying in terms of Mesereau's notion of transformative learning and the idea that our conceptual framework is composed of meaning schemes, and we achieve transformative learning when these meaning schemes are adjusted, replaced, renewed, discarded, or whatever the case might be. So I guess I'm questioning your philosophy in terms of transformative learning and, of course, Bloom's hierarchy.
Well, I know of Mesereau's work because of being an outside reader or something for a missiologist who was working with his work and connecting my covenant epistemology with it. So obviously other people besides you have recognized that resonance. I'm less familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. I'm quite familiar with teaching. I've seen endless transformative aha moments, and a key one is just seeing how subsidiary focal integration works. I have said for years, and I'm sure y'all have in your teaching too, look, the teacher is maybe only half the equation. And you want to pray like anything that there's a breakthrough, which you can attribute to the Spirit, no doubt, so that there actually can be an aha moment. I really do feel like the aha moment is a silent witness to the reality of God, and we don't we do use the word inspiration, I want to be careful not to blame the Holy Spirit for any mistakes. And the thing is, you can have an aha moment that lays hold of what Polanyi would say is a token of reality. So you can get a part of it right and still have the IFM effect and still have a whole bunch more left to discover. Life, I think maturing is like that too. So hope that speaks to what you were saying.
Thank you.
Erin?
Yeah, Esther, thank you for this. The wheels are kind of, I'm struggling with the theoretical part of my own dissertation proposal, so I'm thinking about some things. My comment's going to be significantly less intellectual. I'm a pastor and a practical theologian, I suppose. I loved how you opened your talk with this idea that philosophy is sort of for all of us, right, as human persons. And it, as you were talking about, you were describing ways of knowing, and it reminded me of a podcast I listened to on my way to work, which was an interview with the CEO of Pixar. And he said that he said something that reminded me of what you said, that creativity, he described creativity as this long, dark tunnel. And he said, I always hope it's going to be otherwise. I always hope that this time I'm going to have an idea that's fully formed and just comes that way. But it's never like that. And as you're describing what it is to know, that the process of knowing inherently involves not knowing, and the sort of creative groping towards not knowing. Anyway, thank you for that, for putting some language around that. And yeah, it was very insightful.
Yeah. And actually, I would like you to stick the word yet in between not and knowing. Because that's what's so cool is, you know, Polanyi said you can actually have a sense that you're moving closer to whatever it is. I mean, in our creative process and all those dark tunnels and stuff like that, you have to decide whether you're barking up a wrong tree and have to start over. It can be agonizing. It just really can. And then we have, you know, peer reviewers and other people, you know, juried art exhibitions to say whether something, to accredit whether you actually did come up with something. So it's very, very humbling. But here's the other thing that's so cool, and that is we're in touch with reality. And like one of the things, especially in Doorway to Artistry, we have sold reality down the river. We think it's static, impersonal, and actually, if it's person-like, it's dynamic and living. The IFM effect about knowing is that way because reality is that way. Any real thing is irreducible to its components, and it opens itself to endless possibilities. And artists explore that, but so do all of us. Seashells? Oh, let's put some Mod Podge on that. Like, what seashell would have come up with that? You know what I'm saying? So there's just lively possibilities. And here's the thesis of Doorway to Artistry. Yes, I said in Loving to Know that we are to invite the real. In Doorway to Artistry, I'm saying the real invites you first. So reality is hospitably welcoming you. Think about my old distrust of the real. Oh no, we are lavished in, wrapped in the real. And actually, to finish something I was saying, I wanted to add on earlier, I really see myself as working out of Genesis 1:1. This is a Christian doctrine of creation. So Michael Hanby, a philosopher, says the primacy of things is distinctively at home in the Christian vision. The Greeks didn't have it, and the moderns rejected things. So the primacy of things, what you know, one of the things about things and reality that makes it so astonishing, in fact, the most astonishing thing about each one of you is that you're here, which is the Lord's let there be in this instant, here, now. Yes, yes, You might not exist.
We will do one more question. So Alama, go ahead, and then we'll finish off.
Yeah, thank you very much for this insightful talk. So my question is, when you say subsidiary, do you mean tentative? In other words, whatever clues or hunches we are getting is tentative until it is proven by a higher form of knowing.
Yes and no. It's tentative, but at the same time, if you hold it as tentative and don't give yourself to it, you're never going to make it to the discovery. Somehow you have to entrust yourself to what you half understand. And at the end of the day, even if I had the Bible memorized, how much would I know about God? Not very much. Yet I must entrust myself to what I half understand. And that's as true of bike riding as it is of knowing God. So, you know, we've been schooled in modernity to being tentative, to being critical. And I would say that opposes understanding. We do not know in order to love. We love in order to know. You have to give yourself to live life on the terms of the yet to be known. That's called hours on the piano bench. That can't be tentative. You cannot be a tentative practicer if you're ever going to invite the real of a concerto. See? Something like that. So yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Thank you, Esther. This has given us lots to think about and lots to kind of connect with our own area of interest in research. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I appreciate your coming into my life. And I would invite you to visit my website and see what I'm up to in the different books. And if you would, share your contact information, become what I call an ERF, an ERF, Esther's Readers and Friends. Be happy to have you in that group and be a part of supporting you in whatever you do. So blessings.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop recording here.